The first concentration camp built by the Nazis and opened was Dachau. The site became operational on the 22nd of March 1933, and it was a place where over 188,000 people were imprisoned within the barbed wire fences. At least 41,500 people would never make it out alive at Dachau. It was a huge site which almost had 100 subcamps serving it, and it was a place which was synonymous with torture and execution. There were standing cells and pole hangings that took place inside the roll call yards, and the SS guards became horrifically savage and brutal. They were schooled in how to run a sadistic site where they terrorised the inmates. But in the final days of the camp's operation, the SS began to cover their crimes and destroy evidence of the killings there. Huge death marches took place, and this led to more killing. But there were a number of reprisal executions in Dachau, in which the Allied soldiers and also prisoners took their revenge. Join us today as we look at the brutal executions of the final days of Dachau, and to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. When Dachau opened, a speech was made to the SS men who were working there. It summed up the attitude that the guards had towards the prisoners, and it was said, "Comrades of the SS, you all know what the Führer has called us to do. We have not come here for human encounters with those pigs in there. We do not consider them human beings, as we are, but as second-class people. For years they've been able to continue their criminal existence, but now we are in power. If those pigs had come to power, they would have cut off all our heads. Therefore we have no room for sentimentalism. If anyone here cannot bear to see the blood of comrades, he does not belong and had better leave. The more of these pig dogs we strike down, the fewer we need to feed." Over the years they would brutalise many different prisoners from day one. Inside of the camp, many medical experiments also took place, and the SS doctors would conduct many cruel experiments onto innocent people. There were many different people from different countries who were imprisoned there, and the camp was originally designed to hold German and Austrian political prisoners, as well as Jews. There were thousands of members of the clergy who were also imprisoned. There were 19 female guards who served at Dachau until they were liberated, but most of the guards were men. It seems that at Dachau there was a known lower percentage of female guards than at other sites such as Auschwitz and Stutthof. The first deaths occurred at Dachau shortly after the camp was opened, but the inmates were forced to conduct back-breaking labour. It was used as a site for SS guards to train and then go to other sites, and 4,000 Soviet prisoners of war were murdered by the Dachau Commandant's guard at the SS shooting range. This was found 2 kilometres from the site and was of course a war crime. But then as the war continued, Dachau became a place where thousands more were being sent to each week and month. Dachau was secured by a heavily guarded number of watchtowers, and there was also no man's land around it, and some of the guards threw inmates' hats into this area. When they went to retrieve these, they were then shot dead by the guards. Some prisoners decided to take their own lives by just walking into this area, as they could not take the conditions and brutality anymore. The torture at the site was truly horrific, with standing cells, tiny little prison cells, in which the inmates were forced to stand up 24 hours a day, with a number of prisoners, with hardly any oxygen. These were considered the oubliettes of Dachau, but also, as mentioned, at roll call floggings would take place, as would executions, to strike further fear into the hearts of prisoners. A women's camp opened there in August 1944, and as the war turned against the Germans, the conditions of Dachau got much worse. The prisoners were suffering from a lack of food, and disease was spreading around the site, with typhus causing major problems due to the overcrowding, poor sanitation, and lack of provisions. The final transports of prisoners were sent to Dachau on the 19th of April 1945, and a train from Buchenwald was later diverted to keep new transports from Dachau. On board this train were around 300 corpses who had died on the way, and the prisoners were then forced to carry the dead to a ravine. They were then shot by the guards themselves. But as the Americans drove through Bavaria, the commandant of Dachau said to Himmler that they should probably hand over the camp to the Americans, but Himmler said, "No prisoners shall be allowed to fall into the hands of the enemy alive." On the 24th of April 1945, the SS ordered up to 7,000 inmates on a death march south, and any inmates who could not keep up was shot, and a mass grave containing 1,071 prisoners was found on the route. The death rate before liberation was around 200 a day, and Himmler had ordered prisoners from the north of Germany to be marched into the North Sea and the Baltic Sea and drowned or shot dead in it. But as the war was over, the SS destroyed much of the evidence of their crimes, but the Americans would then take control of the camp. On the 29th of April 1945, soldiers from the 3rd Battalion, 157th Infantry Regiment, 45th Infantry Division, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Felix L. Sparks, approached Dachau, and they first came across 39 railway boxcars with 2,000 corpses inside. The smell and sight of the horror made many of the Americans sick, and they began to move towards the complex, firing on members of the SS. The soldiers found more bodies further in the complex, and they found a row of concrete structures containing hundreds of dead bodies, and they also found the gas chambers and the crematoria. The camp was surrendered to Brigadier General Henning Linden of the 42nd Infantry Division. It was said the Swiss Red Cross representative said there were around 100 SS guards in the camp who had their arms stacked except for the people in the tower. He had given instruction that there would be no shots fired and it would take about 50 men to relieve the guards, as there were 42,000 half-crazed inmates, many of them typhus infected. He asked if I were an officer. I replied, I am Assistant Division Commander of the 42nd Infantry Division and will accept the surrender of the camp in the name of the Rainbow Division for the United States Army. Dwight Eisenhower would comment on the capture of Dachau saying, our forces liberated and mopped up the infamous concentration camp at Dachau, and this led to the liberation of 32,000 prisoners and 300 SS guards were neutralised. It was said regarding the capture of Dachau, the Americans came on April 29th, a Sunday. Work had stopped in the camp on Wednesday, and an evacuation was being organised. One transport of 4,000 prisoners was able to get away, but the 42nd and 45th Infantry Divisions covered the 40 miles from the Danube faster than the Germans expected. At noon on Sunday the camp was quiet, and the SS guards were at their posts in the towers, when a cry, Americans, went up. A prisoner rushed towards a gate, and a guard shot him. Outside, a single American soldier stood looking casually at the towers, while the guards eyed him and others, who were 200 or 300 yards away. When the Americans opened fire, the guards in the gate towers came down, hands in the air. One held a pistol behind his back, and the first American shot him. In the next few minutes, a jeep drove up. In it were a blonde female war correspondent and a chaplain. The chaplain asked the prisoners, now crowding to the gate, to join him in the Lord's Prayer. Troops of the 42nd and 45th Divisions, who liberated Dachau in the afternoon on the 29th of April, were fighting in Munich the next morning, and by nightfall had along, with the 15 Corps, other 3 divisions, captured the city that was the capital of Bavaria and the birthplace of Nazism. But the US soldiers affected by what they found at the site conducted reprisal shootings and executions of the SS men who worked there. Lieutenant Colonel Sparks saw around 50 German prisoners who were captured being rounded up and hustled into an area which was used for storing coal. The area was enclosed by an L-shaped wall. These POWs were guarded by a machine gun team, and then Sparks left those men as he went to force the surrender of other SS men who had not yet given up. But as he left, he heard a soldier shout, "They're trying to get away," and then the machine gun fire came. Sparks ran back, and a 19-year-old soldier, nicknamed Bird Eye, manned the machine gun, and Sparks said he killed about 12 of the prisoners and wounded many more. The gunner was in tears and said the prisoners were trying to escape. He also added that it was the foregoing incident which had given rise to wild claims in various publications that most or all of the German prisoners captured at Dachau were executed. Nothing could be further from the truth. The total number of German guards killed at Dachau during that day most certainly did not exceed 50, with 30 probably being a more accurate figure. The regimental records for that date indicate that over 1,000 German prisoners were brought to the regimental collecting point. Since my task force was leading the regimental attack, almost all of the prisoners were taken by the task force, including several hundred from Dachau. Another testimony given by Howard Buchner, a first lieutenant, did not contradict Sparks, and he said when he arrived in the yard that he saw around 15 or 16 German soldiers lying dead along the wall. He said some of the wounded there were still moving, and he did not know if any medical attention was being called for the wounded. He would later claim that the US forces killed 520 German soldiers, including 346 on the orders of First Lieutenant Jack Bushyhead in a mass execution that allegedly took place in the coal yard hours after the first shooting. Berkner did not witness this, and his sworn testimony did not include anything about a second shooting, leading historians to doubt this. Another account offered the short extra information saying some of the Nazis were rounded up and summarily executed, along with the guard dogs. It was alleged that around 17 German SS soldiers were shot near to Tower B, or that around 25 or 50 were killed by the inmates. It was said by a prisoner at Dachau that following the liberation, prisoners swarmed over the wire and grabbed the Americans and lifted them to their shoulders. Other prisoners caught the SS men. The first SS man elbowed one or two prisoners out his way, but the courage of the prisoners mounted. They knocked them down, and nobody could see whether they stomped him or what, but they were killed. In other parts of the site, SS capos and collaborators were beaten with sticks and shovels. There was a number of incidents where American soldiers turned a blind eye as prisoners beat German guards to death with shovels. One witness, Lieutenant Bill Walsh, witnessed the beating, and another said there wasn't much left of an SS soldier's face, but the soldier said to the man who did the beating, "You've got a lot of hate in your heart." But in the aftermath of the clean-up, there were immediate war crimes trials held inside of Dachau, which dealt with many of the guards and former commandants who took part in crimes at Dachau and other sites. There were actually 465 trials, but the Dachau camp trial saw 40 men charged with war crimes in connection with Dachau and linked to the evacuation of the camp, and also camp doctors and medical staff were charged with selections, mistreatments and experiments upon prisoners. 36 death sentences were given out, and these occurred inside the walls of Landsberg prison, where a gallows was found inside of a courtyard there. Inside of Dachau in the final days of the war in Europe, there was much horror and devastation. The SS guards had tried to hide the remains of thousands of people who died at the camp, and they must have hoped that these corpses would never be found. However, they were the ones who were ultimately responsible for the conditions of the camp and the liquidating of inmates who were tragically killed. But the American liberators, in reprisal for the horrors that they saw, carried out a number of killings of the SS guards and former staff at Dachau that were found, and they also turned a blind eye to some of the prisoners getting revenge for themselves. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.